Hello ladies, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about breathing today. So you might be thinking, well, I've been breathing for, gosh, I can't even remember how long I've been breathing for. I'm pretty sure I know how to do it. And you're probably right, but I do want to just give you a couple things to think about in terms of what we deem proper breathing. So in my post, you're going to see a little bit of an explanation about the core, which is what we're talking about today, and integral to core management, core training, and really any lifting, exercising, or participating in life in general is the idea of the core and what it does. So the main function of the core is to manage what's called intra-abdominal pressure, the pressure within this area of your body. The core, when we talk about intra-abdominal pressure regulation, can be kind of constricted to one particular area, but the core defined in fitness terms and physical therapy terms, in medical terms, really can extend out to almost any part of like the torso itself. It consists of layers and layers and layers of muscles. But we're going to concentrate today right in this area. So a woman named Donna Lee came up with this theory of the core as a canister. And if you think of how a canister is shaped, you have a round sort of like a cylindrical tube kind of portion, and then a top and a bottom. So in terms of our core, the cylindrical part would be our torso, the bottom is your pelvic floor, and the top is your diaphragm muscle, which spans all the way across the rib cage, front, back, and then out to the sides. Think of sort of like a mushroom shape, or like an umbrella. And the function of this area of your body is to regulate your intra-abdominal pressure, which is really important for movement, as I mentioned. So what we're going to try and think about is how our breathing is the mechanism by which that happens. And when you breathe, the diaphragm is a muscle and it contracts, and when it contracts, it shortens, which causes it to lower in the abdominal cavity. So it lowers down, and that decreases the pressure in the chest cavity, allowing air to come into the lungs. So you think of that as inhaling. So the diaphragm goes down. Intra-abdominal pressure needs to adapt or change in reaction to that. And so what happens is this comes down, the diaphragm, the top of the canister comes down. The rib cage, the belly, and the back should sort of expand. And also, at the same time that the diaphragm is dropping, the pelvic floor should actually drop a bit too. So that's where we kind of get hung up sometimes, is those other areas sort of reacting to the diaphragm coming down into the space. So I want you to think about what those other areas of the canister need to do. So the diaphragm we usually have pretty controlled. That's like outside of our conscious regulation. That kind of does its thing, and it's our job to make sure that the rest of it is going smoothly. So I would say, I would be willing to bet that most of us are not really consciously belly breathing or allowing the abdomen to expand a bit. Most of us are definitely probably not thinking about what the back part of us is doing. And I'd be surprised if any of us are thinking about what our pelvic floor is doing when we're breathing. So I want you to dial in on that a little bit for a few minutes. So you're going to want to get into whatever comfortable position you feel like you can sense your pelvic floor. If that's lying down, great. That's going to restrict the movement of your back a teeny bit, but that's fine for now while you figure out the pelvic floor situation. Often, lying down is easiest to control the pelvic floor because you're not working it against gravity. It's not working against gravity. If you were going to lie down, I might try a lying position with the knees open like this. And then what I would usually say is if you're going to do knees apart, feet together, and place pillows underneath of the thighs to support it. That way it takes the slack out of your adductor muscles and just allows everything to relax. And then you can really dial into what the pelvic floor is doing. And so what I want you to focus on with the breathing, so whether you're sitting or lying down or standing if that's most comfortable for you, whatever position works you think to get in touch with the pelvic floor, I would focus a few times on really visualizing the motion of what the diaphragm and pelvic floor should be doing together. I want you to think about, by no means bearing down and pushing the pelvic floor down, but just relaxing and thinking about it rising and falling with your breath as the diaphragm, contracts and relaxes with the breath. So again, as you inhale, the pelvic floor should drop, and then as you exhale, the pelvic floor should rise. When we go to do a lift, it's super important for us to manage that intra-abdominal pressure, and when we go to engage our bodies in purposeful exercising, lifting, exertion, typically what's going to happen is we're going to contract our abs, and back muscles, pull in that core, pull our belly button to our spine. I believe the cue we're using in the program is ribs to hips. And what that means is we're thinking about pulling in and contracting around this region, right? So we're pulling the canister in this way. So in order to sort of stabilize and manage that intra-abdominal pressure, we need the other musculature to be in coordination and working properly. So again, as we exhale, which when you're timing breathing with a lift, don't get too hung up on this stuff because, again, if you practice in more of a rested state, the pelvic floor and diaphragmatic coordination will come, and then that will carry over to when you're exerting yourself, because you're going to be thinking about a lot of stuff while you're lifting. But when we are sort of, tightening up our core, stabilizing our core for a lift, and we take a nice deep breath in before we exert. As we exert, we want to exhale, and therefore consciously sort of contracting the pelvic floor, assisting that core contraction in the abdomen region, and keeping a neutral spine. So as that sort of lift is occurring, that exertion is occurring, breath is, being exhaled, intra-abdominal pressure is changing along with the thoracic pressure, and it all kind of works. I don't want you guys to get super hung up about this. I do want you to pay attention to it because there are several factors that make breathing change for a lot of us. And the reason I say that is because, of the tissues that we need to be moving correctly for that to happen. Maybe we're somebody who has a history of low back pain, and our muscles tend to be tight back here, or our movement patterns tend to be guarded back here. We could be less likely to be back breathing. Maybe you're somebody who who has some restrictions in, from a postural standpoint or scoliosis, and that causes some changes in your breathing pattern. Maybe, you've had an abdominal surgery such as a cesarean or something laparoscopic where they go through your belly button, an appendectomy, something else where they've kind of disrupted the abdominal musculature and caused scar tissue. That can alter the mechanics of muscle contraction and the movement necessary for breathing significantly. If you're somebody who, kind of tends to hold it in all day because, you're worried about what you're looking like in your clothes, or maybe you've been conditioned since, childhood, or, I don't know, by our patriarchal society, for instance, to hold your belly in. If you're doing that, you're restricting the natural motion necessary for breathing, and that can influence what your pelvic floor is doing. You're holding in here, maybe you're tensing the pelvic floor, maybe the pelvic floor is taking too much of the pressure. That can lead to weakness, pelvic organ prolapse, incontinence. Any kind of dysfunction with the breathing can cause a host of other issues for chicks and men, but we're talking about us. So I just wanted to bring you, maybe, I take a look at what you wear as well. If you wear, I have these leggings on and they come up pretty high. So this is actually kind of restrictive as well to that, to belly breathing and stuff. So if you're someone who wears clothing to work that tends to sort of hold you in, maybe a controlled top pantyhose or a belt, with your, maybe you wear a unicorn. Maybe you wear a unicorn. Tell me you have little kids without telling me you have little kids. I just said unicorn instead of uniform. And if you are someone who wears a unicorn, the Fairy Tale Big Game Commission would like to be notified, because, that's a punishable offense, is killing unicorns for sport, for clothing. Anyway, if you are someone who wears a uniform with a belt that's tight, you've got weight around here, I'm thinking law enforcement, security, any kind of job that a woman might do where she would have weight hanging from her waist, a tight fitting belt, sort of any kind of restrictive clothing is what I'm getting at, can inhibit your breathing pattern. And just wanted to draw your attention to this stuff. So I want you to focus on this today, and forever and ever and always, and really focus on that. Think about that canister. Think about what the pelvic floor is doing. Time it with the diaphragm. Don't go insane with it with your lifting, but allow it to start to inform how you breathe at a resting state, and it should help hopefully transition over to when you're intentionally being active. Anyway, have an awesome day, guys. If you have questions, drop them in the comments, or include them in your form check-in questions, submission, whatever or just reach out, pop an email